Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. So it has been a while since I did a sewing video, and today I'm going to be doing another one, but it's a little bit different from my previous ones because instead of drafting my own patterns, I am going to be using a commercial pattern. So a couple of years ago, I bought like a few patterns from Taobao and I was mentally preparing myself to be reading the instructions in Chinese, but little did I know that these patterns don't come with instructions. So I had to decipher the patterns myself and like figure out the sewing steps. Since Chinese New Year is around the corner, I decided to sew this pattern up. So this pattern is something reminiscent of Chinese Qipao or Cheongsam, and I thought that it's very apt for Chinese New Year because of the Chinese elements in this design. And the best part is that it has pockets, all the pockets for your 红包. 恭喜发财，红包拿来，我有口袋，放我红包. And yeah, so this dress that I'm wearing right now is what I have sewn out from this commercial pattern, and I'm actually quite happy with how it turned out. So let's see how I did it. So the paper pattern came in a envelope, and when you take out the paper pattern, it's folded, and I had to unfold and unfold and unfold and unfold it. The paper pattern is huge. It can't even fit onto the table, but that is to expected. If I'm not wrong, most pattern papers are like this because you do need to have a lot of patterns to come together to make a piece of clothing. The first thing I'm gonna do is to cut out the patterns. For this particular pattern that I have, the seam allowance is already added, which you can clearly see on the paper itself. Some paper patterns do not include seam allowance. You have to either trace it out and add seam allowance and then cut, or if there's enough space on the paper itself, you have to add seam allowance before you cut. So usually when I cut paper patterns, I will use my X-Acto knife or a pen knife to cut straight lines and a pair of scissors to cut the curves. I know you can actually use the X-Acto knife and just cut the curves out quicker, but this usually gives me less control, so I would prefer to use a scissors and cut slowly but have more precision when cutting. Also, as you can see on this pattern, it only comes in one size. However, as far as I know, other commercial patterns like Simplicity, they have a range of sizes all included into one pattern. Usually for patterns like this, people will either trace it out on another piece of paper and cut it out, or they cut the biggest size out and fold away the parts that they do not need for the size and trace that size on fabric to cut it out. I personally have not really used a pattern like this before, so I do not know how it works out. Alright, so here are all the pieces cut out. Oh my god, it took me forever because I was trying to be as precise as I could. But you can see that the pattern pieces are all very crumply and there are like fold lines on it. So what I'm going to do now is to iron all the kinks out. It is very important to have your pattern as flat as possible because the moment there's kinks in it, there's a very high chance that the shape of the fabric that you just cut out is incorrect, is wrong. And this is very important because once the shape is off, the measurements are already off, and the finished product that you put together might not fit properly. So you can see how flat and nice my patterns are right now. It doesn't take too long to iron your patterns, so it's good to not skip this step at all. So now that my patterns are cut out, I'm going to show you how to read your patterns. For every piece of pattern paper, you will find a grain line, and at the grain line is where you will see all the information about this particular piece. You can see here it says C316, which doesn't really make any sense to me, but I'm assuming that it's some sort of code for this design, which is like a Qipao design. And then M for M size, and then 后片 means the back. So this pattern piece is for the back of this Qipao, and times 1 means that you are to cut out one piece on fabric. So since C316 doesn't make any sense to me, I'm just going to give this pattern a name myself. I'm just going to call it Taobao Cheongsam. And usually on my pattern pieces, I will also write down the total number of pieces this pattern is supposed to have. For this instance, this pattern has 9 pieces in total, and I will put like 1 out of 9 so that I will know that this is the first piece out of all the 9 pieces. Doing so lets me know in the future if like there's any loose piece that's lying around. I just take a look on the pattern piece and I see Taobao Cheongsam, then I know which pattern this piece belongs to. Or if I want to resew this piece again but only have 7 pieces, I know that 2 pieces are missing. So I'm just going to add all these details to the rest of the pattern pieces. I haven't even started sewing and I've already encountered the first problem. There are like 3 pieces from the pattern that I do not know what they are meant to do. Even googling the Chinese word didn't help, so I'm probably going to go back onto Taobao and ask the seller what these pieces are supposed to do. Hopefully they can still answer me, because I bought this pattern 1.5 years ago. 领十样. Ling, I know it's collar. 十样, I'm not sure what it means. And it's super weird because this pattern is basically the exact same pattern as the collar pattern, except that it just doesn't have the seam allowance. And it also doesn't say how many pieces of fabric we're supposed to cut. So I guess that we are not going to be cutting fabric using this pattern. And then this one says 扣半. I have no idea what 扣半 means, but I'm guessing that 扣, right, because 扣 is like new 扣, so I'm guessing this has to do with buttons. Maybe you're supposed to use this pattern to make frog buttons. The grain line isn't straight down, it's like slanted, so this is going to be cut on bias. And this last one, this one says 前开紧地紧, 前开紧地紧. I have no idea what this is supposed to do. I've gotten my answer. So she just simply sent me like a bunch of photos, which I actually didn't understand at first, but she eventually sent this photo. I'm guessing this piece is for underneath the frog buttons. And yes, I was right. This one, this 扣半 is really for the frog buttons, but I don't think I'll be making my own frog buttons. We shall see. And yeah, I was right about this as well. It's for tracing, but I really can't think of like where I'm gonna use this piece though, because in my head, right, I don't think I'm gonna be tracing out anything for the collar. I'll just sew the two collars together, so maybe I will not be using this piece at all. Now that I have sorted out like what all the pieces are supposed to do, let's go and cut it out on fabric. Before that though, I need to iron out my fabric first, because I'm pretty sure it's very wrinkly right now. The purpose of ironing the fabric again is to make sure that the fabric lies flat when you cut. So it's actually the same as why I iron my pattern papers. It's just to make sure that when I cut, the shape is as precise as possible, because any small little kinks or like any small little folds on it when you cut will make a difference. Now that the fabric is ironed, I'm going to cut the pattern pieces out. It is also important to match your grain lines to the fabric. I match the grain line by measuring the distance between the grain line that's on the pattern to the selvage. This is also why I would prefer my grain lines on the pattern pieces to be like super long. I feel like the grain lines that is drawn on this particular pattern piece is very short, and it's very hard to make sure that I'm cutting exactly on the grains. So I just drew a longer line so that it helps me to make sure that I'm cutting on the grain line. Also, I decided that I want to color block my dress. The right shoulder and the right sleeves will be of another color, so I need to make sure that I cut out the pieces correctly. Also, for this pattern, it's a bit weird because usually for sleeves, 2 notches will indicate that it's the back of the sleeve and 1 notch will indicate that it's the front. But for this pattern, there's only 1 notch throughout. So I don't know whether the 1 notch is the back or the front. That's why I decided to go and ask the seller, and they replied that the one with the notch is the front. For the back fabric, it's going to be symmetrical, so I'm folding the pattern piece together so that I can just cut half of it on fold on the fabric. So this means that it's easier for me to match my grain lines, and also it means half the work of cutting because I just need to cut half of the pattern. A few days has passed since I last filmed anything for the Qipao video, but I have finished cutting out all the pieces that's needed already. So today let's start sewing. Okay, so the first thing I noticed from the photos on the website and also from the photos that the seller has sent me is that only one of the 3 frog buttons is working, the one that is at the collar. The other 2 that is at the side is sewn shut, so it doesn't open up. So it seems like the front 2 pieces are sewn shut together at the side here. So I'm gonna tackle the front first so that the front piece will become like one piece and the rest will be easy to do. So let's get sewing! So I took out all the front pieces, which includes these 3 fabric. The huge fabric that's at the background is the big front piece, and then this rectangle fabric is the 紧扣, 紧衣, I don't know, I can't remember the name of it, but yeah, it's the one that goes underneath the frog button. So I'm just gonna start with it and sew the sides together. And then I'm going to snip the corners off and a bit of the seam allowance to reduce bulk when I flip the right sides out. And then now I can attach this piece to the right shoulder piece. On the right shoulder piece, there's a notch at the front. That is where I'm supposed to align this small piece of fabric to. So when I was trying to match my big front piece pattern to the right shoulder piece, I realized that I didn't transfer the notch over to the big piece. So I had to go and match the pattern piece to the fabric piece again just to transfer the notch. Once the notch is transferred, I can now match the two pieces together. So the two notches should match each other when I'm sewing. And according to the photos that I see online, the front of the qipao seems to be sewn from here to here. So that's what I'm going to do. Now that it's sewn together, I'm going to snip a bit of the seam allowance right at where the notch is. I'm just snipping a little bit more, not passing where the stitches are. Doing this will let me be able to fold the seam allowance in different directions. So I'm going to overlock this side on its own, making sure that the fabric of the right shoulder doesn't get caught in the overlocker, and also overlock this edge on its own. Ah, sian. I forgot that the needle on my overlocker broke. Yeah, so gotta change the needle and hopefully I don't need to re-thread the overlocker, because I really hate threading the overlocker. It's like so many steps. I've never changed the needle for this overlocker before, so I hope it's not too difficult. I also went ahead to top stitch the fabric at this area because there's like raw edges coming out. It's kind of like both a top stitch and a hem. So I fold in the fabric by 1 centimeter and top stitch, making sure that when I top stitch it, I'm not sewing that little piece of fabric together. Now I can sew the front piece together with the back piece at the shoulder seams. Go ahead and overlock this part as well. So usually by this stage, I would like to put it on myself to see how the whole outfit is looking like. I mean, obviously it is not sewn together yet, so you can't really see how it looks like exactly, but I just like to have a vague idea of how it's looking. So it's 11 PM right now, it's getting quite late and I have work to do tomorrow, so I'm gonna call it a day for sewing, and yeah, continue tomorrow afterwards. After one day of sewing, there's like a slight complaint that I have for this pattern. So right, in school when we add seam allowance, we were taught to add more to the side with less fabric so that both of the cut edges of the seam, they match each other, like the distance is the same. In this pattern, right, the area where you sew it, the distance is the same, but the cut edges isn't the same. So it was a bit frustrating when I was trying to match the seams. I mean, this doesn't really affect how the clothing will turn out. It's just more of like the sewing process. If you add that small little seam allowance, it will help the sewing process be a lot easier. I actually kind of saw that the pattern was like that, so I expected it during sewing, so it wasn't like a surprise. So anyway, this is like day 1 of sewing. I'm so glad the cutting is out of the way. I prefer sewing so much more. Yeah, and I will continue tomorrow. See you guys tomorrow. Yo guys, I'm back for day 2 of sewing. Don't mind this like towel on my head. I obviously just showered. So anyway, after realizing that I had a missing notch yesterday, I decided that I am going to go through all my fabric to see if I transferred all my notches, and it turns out I did not. So before continuing with sewing, I am going to transfer all the notches over to my fabric. Notches are actually very important because it helps a lot with the sewing. It ensures that the two fabrics that you sew together matches, because like the notch is where they are supposed to match anyway. So don't be like me, please transfer your notches when you cut, because just right after cutting your fabric, your pattern piece and your fabric will match. Now that I've cut and removed my pattern piece from my fabric, I have to go and painstakingly go and rematch all the fabric to the pattern again to transfer the notches. It's very mafan lah. By the way guys, I'm kind of like cosplaying as Barney today. Okay, so after transferring all my notches, I'm going to work on the pockets first. So to sew on the pockets, I'm going to place one side of the pocket bag onto the front with the right sides facing each other. And this is where the notches are going to come into place. We are going to match the notches on the pockets to the notches on the front. Once it's matched, we are going to sew one side of the pocket bag to the front piece from the notch to the notch. Now I'm going to cut the notch a little bit deeper but not past the stitches. This is so that I can flip the pocket back to where it's supposed to go. So only the part where it's stitched will have its seam allowance folded in. The rest of the seam allowance are not folded. After flipping the pocket towards the back, I can go ahead and top stitch it. So now that one side of the pocket bag is sewn onto the front, we are going to take the second piece of the pocket bag and sew the two pocket pieces together, only at the curved edges. Normally after sewing the two pocket bag pieces together, we can go ahead and sew the side seams together and overlock. But because for this dress, looking at the photos online, there's a split hem for this dress. So I'm going to overlock the front sides and the back sides separately so I can iron the seams open and have the hem split. Trying it on again. It kind of looks exactly the same as yesterday, except that it has pockets. Ding ding. Alright guys, so I finished serging the side seams and also the pocket bag, and it's 11 PM again. I am gonna call it a day for today because I have full day class tomorrow starting at 8:30 AM, so I don't want to sleep too late. Oh, and when I was serging my pocket bag, I realized there was one part that I forgot to serge, which I couldn't go back and serge because I already top stitched that part, so like it couldn't fit the serger. So I decided that I'm just gonna go in with my pinking shears and cut it. It is like this zigzag shape, which will help to prevent the fabric from fraying. I was really careful when I was doing this. I was so scared that I was gonna cut into my fabric, and oh my gosh, even being careful, I cut into it anyway. So stupid. But that's fine, it's a small hole, I can mend it with some thread. But yeah, I'll do that tomorrow. So this is sewing day 2 and good night. Alright guys, so I just got back from class, had dinner, chilled for a bit, and it's time to get back to sewing. Ding ding! Now that the sides are all overlocked separately, we can go ahead and sew the two side seams together. But because of the split hem, we are going to stop sewing them together at where the notch is. But again, because I've already overlocked the edge, I can't really see where the notch is. I am going to take out my pattern piece, measure the distance from the bottom to where the notch is, and then put a marking on all the sides where the notch is supposed to be. When sewing the two side seams together, be very careful not to sew the pocket shut. So I usually put 2 pins at where the pocket opening starts and ends, so that when I sew the side seams together, I'll be more careful at that area and always be checking between the fabric to see if it's catching the front piece pocket. Now that the seams are sewn together, I went ahead and pressed it at the iron so that it's an open seam now. And now I can just sew up, across and down to make sure that the overlock edges do not flip to the other side. This is also why I had to overlock the side edges separately, because if we sew it together and then we overlock it together, it will be a closed seam and then we can't fold the hem open and have it split. Now it's time to do the sleeves. So you can see here that the hem of the sleeves is drafted in a way that they added more fabric to the hem, so that when we fold the hem up, it matches at the side. So now we are going to fold the sleeves in half and sew them together at the seams. Also make sure that the overlocking for the seams are done separately, because I want the seams to be an open seam so that there will not be too much bulk when we fold the hem up. And this is where I realized that I actually should have overlocked the hem first, because now that it is sewn together at the seams, it's a bit tricky to feed it through the overlock machine. But anyway, overlock first and then fold the hem up according to the hem allowance given on the fabric and sew the hem. So this is how the insides of the sleeve should look like after hemming and overlocking. Now I'm going to flip the sleeves right sides out and slide the sleeves in through the armhole. Now we are going to set the sleeves in. First thing we're going to do is to match the notch on the sleeve to the shoulder seams. And then match the seams together at the bottom of the armhole. And try my very best to have the two curves to match each other. Oh my goodness, I have no idea how many times I repinned the sleeve to the bodice. It's like not matching, it's so annoying. I even went to take out the pattern to see if I somehow missed the memo that it's supposed to be gathered sleeves, but no, it's not gathered sleeves. So in an attempt to hide my incompetence and shift the blame somewhere else, I went to measure the armhole of the bodice and also the sleeve to see if the measurement matches. Hopefully it's not matching. No, it matches. So yeah, it's my fault that it's not matching. And I don't understand why it's not matching. I was trying so hard to like get them to match. And then I realized, duh, I'm trying to pin two curves together. So one was going this way and one was going this way. Obviously the one that's going this way is going to have more fabric than the one going this way, right? I can't blame the drafter for not drafting the two cut edges to have the same length. Because it's curves and it's impossible to draft it that way, definitely one is going to have more fabric than the other. So after realizing this fact, I tried to match the two fabrics at the sewing lines. And boy, it took me so long to do it again because it's so hard to just match at the sewing lines. It's really my incompetence that is like hindering me. So anyway, after like super duper long again, I finally managed to match them together. Actually, as you can see here, the sleeve fabric has some sort of waves or like gathers going on. That's because it has more fabric lah. Not to worry, because the waves is only at the seam allowance. It would not affect the sewing lines at all. So when I sew it around, there won't be any nicks. That is if I sew it properly. So the next challenge was to try to sew the sleeves to the bodice properly because it was so hard. Like there's so many things that you have to take note of. Firstly, your seam allowance has to be 1 cm. Don't go more than that, don't go less than that. Secondly, make sure you are sewing the sleeve and the bodice together. Don't like just sew on the sleeve and then your bodice is like not under the sleeve. Thirdly, make sure you're not sewing any other fabrics other than these two as well, because there's like a lot of fabric that's attached to this whole component right now. I might accidentally sew extra fabric underneath without knowing, so like I have to take extra care to make sure that that's not happening. Fourthly, I was also trying to make sure that I do not have nicks in my sleeves. So I was like literally going 1 to 2 stitch at a time. 1 2 stitch, okay, try to fit the fabric inside without having the gathers, and then another 2 stitches. Am I in the seam allowance? Another 2 stitches. Am I sewing extra fabric? Another 2 stitches. Am I sewing 2 fabrics together? So it took me super duper long. And when I was finally done, I went to overlock it as well, and I tried it on, and let's just say I didn't really like how it looks. Okay, so not gonna lie, I'm actually quite disappointed with how it's looking so far, because it's looking more like a pajamas than a Qipao Cheongsam thing. I'm hoping that the addition of the 2 frog patterns here and the Mandarin collar is gonna make a difference, because that's the only 2 elements that's left. The dress is like 90% done already, and it's really looking like a pajamas lah. Is it because it's too big? I don't know. And the fit around the arm is quite tight also, as in like there's room, but like when I raise my hands up, it's like that. Disappointing. Yep, I'm quite disappointed with how it's looking right now. But anyway, it's getting late. I don't want to think too much about it. I want to go to bed already. It's later than usual. Yeah, it's 12 AM already because I spent so much time on the sleeves. So yeah, let's just call it a day right now, and hopefully I can finish everything up tomorrow. So now we are going to tackle the Mandarin collar. As you can see on the pattern, it actually just calls for 2 times of the fabric. But usually for collars, I'll add in an interfacing layer as well to make sure that the collar is a bit stiffer. So I decided to just cut out an interfacing layer. And now I'm going to iron the interfacing onto one of the collar pieces. Now that the interfacing is ironed on, I'm going to sew the 2 collar pieces together. At the bottom of the collar, on the piece with the interfacing, I'm going to fold up the seam allowance so that when I sew the 2 collars together, the seam allowance of the interfacing piece is folded up. Oh my gosh guys, I'm pretty sure the sewing gods are looking upon me because my bobbin thread ran out just as I finished my collar. Super lucky, right? For Chinese New Year, sewing some more. Should I be going to buy 4D? Nah, just kidding. Now we are just going to snip the corners to reduce bulk. And I also went ahead to snip away half of the seam allowance on the piece with the interfacing only. So I left the seam allowance as it is for the other collar piece. After snipping the seam allowance off, I tried to flip the collar right sides out, but I was finding it a bit difficult to have the seam as neat as possible and like push the seams out. And I realized that was because I didn't snip the curves of the Mandarin collar, so that's a stupid mistake on my part. Make sure to snip a little bit at the collar area so that it helps to make the seam fold nicely. Go ahead to the iron to press the collar down nicely and also fold in the seam allowance on the piece with the interfacing. So the collar should look something like this at this stage. And now we can attach the collar to the rest of the dress. So the collar pieces have a total of 3 notches. 2 notches is for the shoulder seams and 1 is for the center back. So I'm going to match the collar to the dress at these 3 points. At this point, I'm just attaching the collar piece without the interfacing to the dress. This will be the inside of the collar and the one with the interfacing will be facing outside when worn. This is kind of similar to the sleeves as well, as in we're attaching 2 different curves together. So here I am taking my time to try to match the 2 pieces as best as I can. After matching the 2 pieces, we can go ahead and sew the collar to the dress and it should look something like this. So now we can fold over the collar with the interfacing and sew it down. Make sure that when you fold this collar down, you are covering the previous stitches that were made. Also, when sewing this part down, be very careful because these stitches are going to be visible. It's unlike most of the previous stitches where it's inside of the garment, this will be shown on the outside of the garment. And so all around the collar to top stitch the top part as well. I started from the center back so that the overlapping of stitches will be at the center back. I think it kind of looks better now with the collar. It's not as pajamas-y like, which is good. So the next thing now is to do frog buttons. I have 2 frog buttons currently and I can't really decide which one to put because like the red matches, but I think the yellow looks better, but I can't decide. Shall I ask Mom? Mommy! Which one nicer?
Which one nicer? 哎呦，新年当然是这个啦，不过这个不是那么亮。
如果不是新年呢？
这个比较漂亮。
有没有像 pajamas 啊？
会啊。
不会吗？我觉得很像 pajamas 嘞。
因为我有这样的衣服啊。
你的衣服很像 pajamas 咯。
哈哈，这样就像了。
Short pause from sewing because the brother is treating us to dinner, not because he's generous, but because his coupons are expiring, but I'm not complaining. Okay, I just got back from dinner and it's time to hopefully finish up the dress. Since both my mom and I agreed that the yellow frog button looks better than the red one on the dress, I am just gonna go with the yellow one. The placement of the frog buttons are also indicated on the pattern piece itself, so I just took out the pattern piece and matched with the front piece. Took a pin to indicate where the frog buttons are supposed to go. But after I put the frog buttons following the placements on the pattern itself, I kind of didn't really like how it looked. I would have preferred it if the bottom 2 buttons were closer together. but I decided anyway just to sew according to the pattern because I trust the pattern more than I trust myself. And so the tedious and long process of hand sewing the frog buttons began. It took me so super long just to sew one button, and during that time I kind of decided that even if the placement of the buttons weren't that ideal, I'm just gonna deal with it because I'm much too lazy to unstitch everything and re-sew it again. So here I have one button done and I have 5 more to go. So the total of 6 different buttons took me 5 episodes of a Chinese drama to complete. But hey, I think it looks so much better now that the frog buttons and the Mandarin collar is in place. I'm so happy with how it looks like right now compared to the pajamas-y look it was just a few days ago. So now I'm only left with hemming and... I mean, 你看我的鸡包好了。
这种 size 我应该也是可以穿。
穿吧，你真的穿了。
行，可以穿的，而且刚刚好呢。当到一进的 size 都我。
哎呀，弟 fits you better 哎。
有咯 ，fits me better 嘞。
来 model 一下，看得到我们家好乱的。So that's how I managed to complete this dress. I'm ready for Chinese New Year! Except that we kind of can't really celebrate it here in Singapore because of the COVID situation. I mean, we are allowed to visit people, but there's a maximum capacity of 8 visitors per day, so I highly doubt that we'll be going around visiting, maybe just like 1 house or 2 houses the max. I'm ready for Chinese New Year! 红包红包! Anyway, thanks for watching and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!